All right, well, let's go ahead and kick things off. We don't punish the punctual here at Blueprint. So good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's webinar. I'm John Robinson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Blueprint. I see many of the attendees on here, several of our clients and partners, as well as quite a few names that I don't recognize. And, I'm equally thrilled at both of those. So I want to welcome everybody. Thanks for sharing some of your afternoon with us today for today's webinar. We're very excited about this. Today's webinar is called Building an Elite Performance Culture for Your Wealth Practice. I'm particularly excited to introduce Dr. Eric Downing, who is renowned for his work with elite teams and enhancing organizational cultures in high stakes environments, including military special forces and the financial services sector, both pretty massive, large organizations all the way down to fairly small two-person shops. Eric is a great friend and partner to Blueprint, and we're excited that he's here today and the expertise that he's going to share. Today, Eric's going to be sharing and really exploring the key principles to enhance your team performance and client relationships. We'll discuss the importance of understanding motivations, building trust, and developing strong communication skills. Eric's also going to examine how embracing risk and identifying execution barriers can advance your advisory practice. From my perspective, Eric's unique skill set here built on his military experience and his corporate experience aligns with our philosophy at Blueprint of having skin in the game. And what I mean is that Eric is not talking about these concepts in the abstract. He's taken these concepts and principles and applied them in real time with, in my view, impressive results. And this is one of the reasons we're thrilled to have him here sharing his insights that can elevate your advisory practice to the next level or even potentially to elite levels. In that respect, our Blueprint's skin in the game in this is trying to model those principles around high performance cultures and advisor practice management. If you look at our content, whether it's this webinar, a paper we put out several years ago called the Elite Advisor Playbook that we continue to iterate on year after year, we're not only producing that type of content, including blogs, but we're continually adapting and applying these principles not only in our asset management business, but specifically across our advisory platform. If you look at the Blueprint family of companies, we're currently managing a little over 1.2 billion in assets, with the advisory platform being the fastest growing segment of our business. And all I'm trying to say is that, to us, trying to model these behaviors, we're trying to demonstrate the effectiveness of the strategies that we're right about and that Eric writes about and presents on and coaches other practices into. So with all that being said, just a quick reminder, a little housekeeping. You're likely to have questions during this webinar, and that's fantastic. If you do, feel the freedom to ask anything relevant to the webinar. If you have a question, we'd ask that you put it in the chat box. Our respective teams are watching that chat box. We're taking all the questions in. The most frequent questions are going to rise to the top. We'll get those asked. And if your question happens to not be one of those, we're going to do our best to take those questions offline and then respond to them ultimately. So with all that said, Eric, thank you again for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, John. I'm really thrilled to be here. Anytime that I'm talking to a large group, there's a number of different types of organizational structures or cultures that present themselves. Could be a 1 or 2 person partnership, could be a much larger team. Sometimes I work with Fortune 100 companies, and we're working across different divisions and regions and that kind of stuff as well. But the underlying thing is that we all have something in common. Whether it's the first thing we wake up in the morning, when we get up and have this nagging subconscious yearning throughout the day, we're all looking for something more. All of us want to find a better way forward. We're looking for a methodology that makes things more reliable and relatable and a path towards more robust performance. Now, this is true for each of us, regardless of how we perceive our current level of success. So taking it to the next level is an ever-present desire for most of us. Doesn't really matter whether you're starting out on your journey, whether you've fallen and you're struggling along the way, or we're experiencing new levels of success day by day. We want and expect our efforts to be rewarded with greater levels of success. Now, the beauty of this pursuit is that it's not a zero-sum game. Every person can improve, can thrive, can achieve an ever-increasing level of performance. The quest for elite performance is driven by different desires, though, in different people. Some of us are driven primarily by a desire to acquire. They perceive the acquisition of money, power, or personal recognition as the fuel that's driving their performance. For others, it's a burning desire to compete is what compels them to the next level. Then there's a third group that feels a constant pull towards being part of something important. These are the folks that are driven by the desire to bond or affiliate. And there's a last group that's driven by a completely different desire. They're driven by an internal compulsion to understand, to comprehend, to know how things work and why they work the way they do. Now, if any of these four drivers are strong enough, they're going to push us along the path of success, no matter how harsh and chaotic that path might be. But wouldn't it be great if you're one of those people that just had that natural, unexplainable, internal burning desire that made achieving your goal of elite performance easier day after day? Those people exist, but they're very rare. Clearly, some of us are more motivated and more driven than others, but realistically, even high-performing people have an ebb and flow to their day-to-day commitment towards achieving elite performance. Some are just better than others at looking past the interruptions, obstacles, and inevitable detours that you're going to find on that path to elite performance. For most of us, it's like anything else. The more conducive and friendly that the environment is to achieve something, the more likely we are to succeed. If you want to experience and enjoy the fruits of elite performance, though, we need to build an environment where elite performance can thrive, because extraordinary ecosystems are what produce extraordinary outcomes. Take the mighty redwoods in California. They don't grow to 275 feet tall and 40 feet in diameter just by happenstance. They grow in an environment that has just the right combination of elements that allows them to reach the most incredible heights of any trees on Earth. Even though they have an opportunity, not every tree in the redwood forest is going to achieve that magnificent height, but every tree that might reach this height does so because of that optimal forest environment. I think elite human performance is really no different. If we expect and encourage elite performance, we got to create an environment where that performance has the greatest opportunity to develop. Elite performers are going to achieve their optimal performance in an elite performance culture. Now, building this type of culture is not easy, but the good news is it's very achievable if we focus on it. Not a single one of us, though, is going to achieve this level of performance or build and enjoy an elite performance culture without a high level of commitment to that process. The journey is probably going to be different for each of us, and the first step for all of us, though, is to commit to elite performance. Now, for me, that first step towards making an uncommon commitment to elite performance was a direct path from high school straight into the Army. At 17 years old, I decided I was going to do whatever it took to become an Army Ranger. And what it ended up taking was committing to a 5-year enlistment contract rather than the standard 3 years in order to get a guaranteed assignment to the 1st of the 75th Ranger Battalion. Now, that's a big commitment for a 17-year-old. And the Army called it a guarantee, but just sort of a guarantee. If you didn't make it through the infantry and the airborne jump school, and then the whole deal was off, and they could just assign you wherever they wanted. Fortunately, I excelled in that environment, and it led me to be selected as an elite Army Pathfinder. It also led me to be chosen to be one of the youngest people ever to attend the Army's Jumpmaster School. Now, I can't tell you how uncommon it was for somebody to be allowed to go to that extremely challenging course before they made the rank of sergeant. But all that didn't happen by coincidence. I pursued that slot to attend Jumpmaster training as aggressively as I possibly could. I studied and trained and put my name on a shortfall attendance list so that for any reason, if somebody couldn't make their class date, I was the person that was going to attend in their place on short notice. And it really wasn't all that long until I got that opportunity. Now, this was a school that was famous for having an extremely high washout rate. It was well known that answering even a single critical safety question incorrectly would be grounds for immediate dismissal. At the time I went to that course, it only had a 40% graduation rate. So on the first morning, the instructor showed us a series of slides that detailed the incredible amount of planning and specialized equipment and safety measures that go into a successful military airborne jump. They had pictures that included complex Air Force briefing rooms and various military aircraft, C-130s, C-141s, bunch of Army helicopters, and countless paratrooper parachutes and jump equipment. Then the instructor asked us the first question of the course. He said very clearly, what's the first and most important item necessary for the U.S. Army to successfully and repeatedly exert its airborne military force in combat? Now, you could have heard a pin drop because nobody wanted to get that first question wrong. I did the same thing most of the other people in the course did and thought about the super expense of the aircraft and the jump equipment and the structure of the training facilities. At the same time, I just shrunk down and hoped like hell that they didn't call on me to answer that first question. 3 or 4 other people answered with stuff like the C-130s and the C-141s and the ability of the Air Force to be precise about where they dropped us. It just went on blah, blah, blah. Then the instructor did what all military instructors do when they're tired of hearing incorrect answers. He looked at us and said, "Shut up and quit wasting my time." He reached into his pocket and he pulled something out. It was a simple military helmet chin strap, just like this one. And he explained to us that no matter how much equipment and training you've had, or how much money that the Army spends on you, if you forget to buckle your chin strap and you bang your head on the side of the aircraft on the way out the door, nothing else matters. If you can't think, you can't fight. If you can't fight, you can't win. So what I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to ask each one of you to commit just a little bit. Buckle that chin strap, get ready to think, and let's take a look at what it takes to build an elite performance culture and empower ourselves to perform at that elite level. Now, Webster's dictionary defines performance as the execution of an action or something accomplished. Something accomplished isn't much of a standard. Certainly not an elite performance standard, because we all know that human performance is everywhere. We know that performance can be exhibited individually, in a team setting, or in a leadership role. And yet, it's surprisingly challenging to find meaningful and useful definitions because it's really hard to quantify. One way we can do is examine what makes an effective team by using the Katzenbach definition. You might be familiar with Katzenbach and Smith's definition of an effective team. It's from 1993. It's become the industry standard that's used whenever we want to examine what makes the team effective. Now, they defined effective team performance this way. They said a team is a small number of people with complementary skills who are committed to a common purpose, set of performance goals, and an approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. Their definition is really only describing what makes a team, but it's still useful for framing what's possible if people work together in search of performance. Now, I published a much more comprehensive definition of the characteristics of an elite team in a 2019 paper. I described it this way: a small group of people inextricably bound together by a mutual bond of esprit de corps that few will ever achieve. This exceptional group of committed individuals understands how the advantage of deep motivational insights, the power of total trust, the extraordinary efficiency of refined communications, and the rich rewards of relentless risk assessment always leads to impeccable execution. Now, you may be wondering at this point why we started off with the question about elite performance culture, and now we're off talking about teams. It's a legitimate question. At its heart, an elite performance culture is an environment where people embrace those shared values, common standards, attitudes, and beliefs at such an extraordinary level that it often defines their unifying purpose. That Katzenbach definition is just one of the earliest descriptions that suggests that the individuals are a team because of their mutual characteristics. So one of the most interesting aspects of an elite performance culture is that it's beneficial and empowering regardless of the person's role in the culture. We all know that if you're going to perform at the highest level, you're going to be operating in different roles and in different situations over time. But the beauty of the elite performance culture is that it's a condition that makes it easier to excel as an individual, as a team member, as a leader, or even as a follower. This type of culture has a catalytic effect regardless of your role. A true elite performance culture energizes growth and promotes success in every individual that falls within its scope. It doesn't really matter whether you're new to the game or you're a mid-level performer or you're a seasoned overachiever. An elite performance culture provides the ideal environment with all the essential elements that are needed for hyper-productivity. Those shared values, common standards, attitudes, and beliefs that make up the elite performance culture of different organizations and teams can vary really widely depending on the team. It's often dependent on the mission or the environment that you're operating in. But just as any great ecosystem always brings together precisely the right elements for extraordinary growth, every elite performance culture is made up of a combination of elements that make extraordinary human performance possible. Now, I've been working in and leading and developing elite performance cultures for more than 30 years now. I was first exposed to the power of elite performance culture as an Army airborne pathfinder. And then later I built and managed and led cultures for decades as an executive in the Fortune 100 corporate environment. But even with all that exposure, it wasn't really until I started digging in deep years later and doing the research for my doctorate that I began to realize how much all successful performance cultures have in common. I've identified 5 essential elite performance elements that are always present in any elite performance culture. Those elements are profound motivational insights, extraordinary trust, exceptional communication, relentless risk assessment, and impeccable execution. Now, each of those elite performance elements is critical if you're striving to achieve the optimal performance environment for your individuals, teams, and leaders. Those elements all work together to empower elite human performance. They're interdependent, they're complementary, and they amplify the inputs and performance efforts of all the people that embrace them in the organization. They are, however, not equal. Although each is essential, their symbiotic relationship has both an order to it and an amplitude. And together, they form an equation that describes how these elements work together. So we're going to spend some time today looking at that equation and the various ways that it can help you create an environment that gives you the best opportunity for success. We're going to look at each of the elements. We're going to define what they are. We're going to identify the characteristics that make them essential and then explore how it promotes elite performance. Although each element I said is crucial, and the chance for success is greatly diminished if any of those elements are absent, extraordinary motivational insights are a foundational component of every elite performance culture. Once we begin to understand how these essential elements work together to create an environment that allows extraordinary human performance to flourish, you can start to break them down into actionable building blocks and use them to create our own extraordinary cultural situations. So if I could only have one of the elite essential elements available to me in any given culture, I'd always choose a culture with a deep understanding of the motivational insights of their people. Earlier, I mentioned 4 important desires that are the overarching drivers for most of us. As I explained them, you may have been able to imagine how each of those desires might be influencing the choices you and others are making on a day-to-day basis. So I learned about those drivers more than 40 years ago in all places in a classroom in the Panamanian jungle. We were there to train and prepare for a covert reconnaissance mission. And the Army had flown in a group of agency folks from Washington, D.C. into Panama to teach us how to recognize the potential motivational indicators of the people that we were going to be observing. So they showed us how to use these insights to predict the likely behaviors to come. It was my first exposure to the power of extraordinary motivational insights as a competitive advantage. Those hours of classroom training got far more in depth than just looking at those four major desires. And it really made a serious impression on me. It's what set me on a path to start thinking about the real world benefits of having a deep understanding of what's driving people internally. So our ability to identify these drivers and categorize them is far more sophisticated now than it was back then. So these folks were highly sophisticated intelligence analysts with deep backgrounds in psychology and human behavior, and yet they probably didn't have tools as sophisticated as those that are readily available to us today. They challenged us to immediately begin to use our new understanding of motivation and skills of observation to predict the behaviors of others. Now, having this skill in a complex military mission, being able to observe someone and then better understand what they're likely to do next, definitely put us at a competitive advantage. And if you have that same level of advantage, it's available to you by observing yourself and others through the lens of inherent motivation. So this can be unbelievably valuable in the corporate world. First, it allows you to understand yourself more deeply. Now, most of us think by now that we know what's internally motivating and driving us. And my experience is that most of us have some ideas and insights into this. And still, we all have blind spots that make incredible differences in performance as they're removed. It's human nature for people to mask their problems and insecurities, especially in the work environment, where personal issues can be seen as a weakness or a liability sometimes. That's why people seldom fully reveal their true selves at work. But I want you to imagine what it would be like if every person in your day-to-day work culture had a deep understanding of exactly what was internally driving them. And then imagine further that each person you're interacting with from your team also possessed that level of introspective understanding and then was willing to share those insights to improve everybody's performance. Lastly, what if every person leading you also had this level of insight about you? And the day-to-day culture that you operated in offered you the ability to tap into these insights anytime you were in a leadership role. That's how an elite performance culture works. Now imagine what you could achieve with that level of clarity. Observing others, though, what drives people is both an art and a science. And today, we have state-of-the-art tools that give leaders far more in-depth insights into what's driving their team. The good news is you don't have to go all the way to some jungle in Panama and put up with some intelligence agency suits to figure all this stuff out. By using modern tools, we can begin to look at what drives team members and see precisely what influences are compelling them. We can go beyond just those four broad categories of inherent motivation and begin to get a better idea of the specific areas that are appealing to each individual. We can pretty quickly determine if a person is primarily a theoretical operator or whether they're a utilitarian. We can start to consider the role that their external surroundings might be playing on their decision making. We can also evaluate how they relate to others or how much of a factor their need for power plays in their day-to-day interactions. Now, we know that the way an individual views the importance of methodology can influence whether or not they prefer a very structured approach in their life or they're the type of person that's highly receptive to new ways of doing things. And common sense tells us that no one thing alone is probably driving anybody's decisions. So focusing on developing a deeper level of understanding of what's driving the individual means we can also start to get a better handle on what combination of influences are most likely to make them more engaged with specific opportunities or specific missions. In today's environment, there's no need to play guessing games or just hope that your team's planning and structuring opportunities in a way that most appeals to the various team members. Elite organizations don't play guessing games with their future. They use the tools that they have at hand to make sure that they gain the most in-depth insights into the best ways, the best practices available to make sure that everyone is fully engaged and fully energized. Elite performers know how to recognize these drivers and tap into them, and there's no reason that you can't do the same. So let's ask ourselves, how can we build a culture with a foundation that's based on trust? Well, first, obviously, we'd have to build a culture where the individual can thrive, but also people can work effectively and collaboratively to perform at a higher level than individually possible, and a place where leaders can create an environment that openly embraces strategy and execution. So when we look more deeply, it quickly becomes even more apparent that none of these conditions can occur without trust. Not only is lack of trust not conducive to an elite performance culture, recent studies have shown that people in high trust environments report several beneficial characteristics. They're 74% less stressed. They have 106% more energy at work. It's all self-reported. 50% higher productivity, 13% fewer sick days, 75% more engagement, 29% more satisfaction with their overall lives, and 40% less burnout. In some ways, we live in a world where trust in others appears to be at an all-time low. But in other areas, I think we're trusting people at groundbreaking levels. In the past, we would have never allowed a stranger to drive our kids around town. But with Uber and Lyft, that's something that's pretty commonplace. But trust at work is completely a different story. I recently read a Harvard Business Review article that said 58% of people said that they trust strangers more than they trust their own boss. So I can't tell you how many times in different work scenarios that I've worked with people and engagements, and I've had people tell me that they say I just trust no one. And actually, I think the full sentiment should be trust no one if you want to ensure that your team never enjoys an elite performance culture. Because elite performers can execute in any environment because they live and operate in a culture that's steeped in trust. In a high trust culture, people bring their full selves to the mission, and that's where they do their best work. Conversely, cultures that lack trust either don't perform very well or they fail completely. So building a strong culture of trust is something that doesn't happen overnight. And the good news is that building such a culture of trust, it's not only possible, but it's highly likely that individuals who operate in these cultures can more easily achieve elite performance personally. Environments that have a high level of trust always have a higher level of engagement. They also possess higher levels of innovation, greater energy and passion, and they're more productive overall. In an elite performance environment, it's commonly understood that granting trust is an act of free will. No one actually earns trust. I know most of us have been taught since we're kids, that people have to earn your trust. Trust is granted. The most elite cultures figure out how to avoid talking about trust in the abstract, and they convert that into tangible, trainable, workable elements. Rather than merely expressing a desire to have a high level of trust in their culture, elite leaders find a way to focus each team member on why it's safe to grant their trust to other members of the team. The most successful cultures create an environment where trust is easy to quantify and most likely to grow naturally. But there's a proven foundational structure that you have to incorporate if you want to create or enhance a culture of trust. Elite cultures are built first on trust of integrity. This is the concept that every person on the team is going to demand honesty, ethics, and exemplary character from every other member of the team. So this expectation ensures that each team member, no matter how uncertain or chaotic things might get, is going to behave consistently and reliably. Next, there's trust of competency. Elite cultures recognize and appreciate that each member brings something very important to the table. They place a premium on leveraging their skills and abilities to impact the collective performance of the entire team. And then finally, this is very important, trust of intent. This is a core belief that individuals and team members are always focused on doing what's in the best interest of the organization or team. So you might make a significant mistake, but there should be no doubt that you did it with the intent of doing the right thing for the good of the culture. There's a picture of me flying a Cobra helicopter with some folks, and you talk about trust. You get one rotor blade apart, you really need a lot of trust. But trust of intent fosters an environment of transparency, and it allows for vigorous debate without fear of retribution or fear of being marginalized. Trust becomes a performance characteristic for the organization, not just a measure of the current attitude or condition that exists on a day-to-day basis. Trust as a performance characteristic impacts not only the individual, but once again, the team and the leadership effectiveness of the entire organization. So I'm going to take a little bit of a break here and open it up for some questions. We covered quite a bit of information. We talked a little bit about profound motivational insights and how important it is to understand the motivation of your team. And now we've talked a bit about trust. I just want to check and see if there's any questions at this point about those topics, and then we'll move on a bit and cover the importance of communication.
Yeah. Hey, Eric, this is John. That was great. Thank you. There are several questions and really three main ones as we've synthesized the feedback. So
Okay.
the first up is going back to trust. So with regard to trust in an organization, you mentioned the importance of granting trust versus earning trust. Why does this make such a difference?
Well, it is the key difference between the most elite, successful organizations, whether they're special operations teams I've worked with or individual teams in the corporate arena that are extremely successful. And if you think about it, I mean, most of us have been socialized. I certainly was. That said, hey, people have to earn your trust. Trust is something that you're going to evaluate their actions, and you're going to determine whether or not you can trust them. Most of the highest performing organizations flip that on their head and say we can't have people running around with an invisible scorecard that nobody else knows what the criteria are, and they're checking off enough units that John has shown me that I can trust him enough, and now I can interact with him and I can entrust him with the most important aspects of the organizational mission. It doesn't work that way. Basically, we do a lot of vetting, and especially in the special forces community, of figuring out who gets to be on the team. And once they're on the team, we trust them implicitly until they give us a reason not to. And that whole shift, that paradigm flipping on its head, means that you can have a greater level of trust in the organization much earlier, much quicker than all the people running around with their invisible scorecards.
Yeah, yeah. Fantastic. The second one is, you said you valued a deep understanding of motivational insights over all the other high performance culture components. This attendee wants to know why. Why is that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And boy, I wrestled long and hard with whether trust is most important or motivational insights. And I will tell you, the reason I've come to this conclusion is observation of teams that are extremely effective and working very well. Some level of trust exists in every organization. If it didn't, you would get nothing done. So there is a level of trust and understanding that exists, and it behoove us tremendously to work on that and improve that and make it deeper. But most organizations have a very, very poor or non-existent understanding of what's internally motivating their people. Now, I don't mean terms of motivation like, rah, rah, let's do better, and, it's all row together and that type of motivation. I mean inherent motivation. I mean those four things that I mentioned. Is somebody in the organization because they have a strong drive to affiliate? Is somebody a highly competitive person? You would appeal to those two people with different styles of leadership. One might be very open and engaging to a servant leadership style of leadership, whereas another might be very transactional oriented. If you do this, I'll give you that, right? The competition. So I would tell you that gaining that insight, and it's relatively easy to do. There's some very good tools that help us identify that. Once everybody has a better understanding of what's inherently driving people, they can tailor the mission to appeal most to those drivers.
Yeah. All right. The last question in this for this particular section is, I'm very interested to hear your answer on this. Someone wants to know, what if my organization already has a great culture?
Yeah. So, well, let's be clear, there are some organizations that have phenomenal cultures, right? I don't think there's a culture that exists that can't be improved and strengthened. And I feel very strongly that you either have a culture by design or you have a culture by default. And a lot of organizations I work with that have a good culture, a workable culture, it's by default. It's legacy. It's all the things that were done before and the successes that people embraced from before, and usually some strong leader, maybe a previous CEO, whatever. By design means that you're going to sit down and you're going to assess in these 5 areas that I'm talking about, where are we today in understanding these things, implementing these things, and you're going to take actions to strengthen the culture and make it the ecosystem that I talked about, where people can flourish more easily. You're going to do that in a culture by design. No matter whether you have a good culture by default or not, you're going to do a better job if it's a culture by design.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I do want to encourage everybody listening to, those were great questions we're getting so far. Just want to encourage you to continue throwing out questions into the chat box, and we'll take those, and then we'll ask additional questions at the end.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about the other 3 elements, right? The third element that's just essential for elite performance culture to grow stronger is exceptional communication. As with every other characteristic of this type of culture, a great deal of thought and structure goes into building an ideal communication environment for the team that you have at any given time. As I've examined and analyzed these cultures over the years, I've found that few, if any, of them can operate at the highest level without this exceptional communications capability in place. I seldom see a low-performing culture that has the critical exceptional communication elements already in place. The never-ending goal, which you've heard me repeat over and over so far, and you'll hear it a little bit more because it is so important. Never-ending goal is to create an environment where individuals embrace shared values, common standards, attitudes, and beliefs at such an extraordinary level that it defines their unifying purpose. That's what we're trying to achieve when we talk about an elite performance culture. So that it stands to reason that each of the exceptional communication characteristics is going to support and reinforce those goals. The cornerstone of these communication characteristics is communicating to promote trust and encourage strong relationships throughout the organization. The communication style in these types of cultures focuses on a relentless pursuit of clarity by encouraging best practice patterns, by removing inconsistencies, and then seeking to eliminate miscommunication completely. Leaders and team members create an environment where safe communication is rewarded. It's important to note that safe communication doesn't only mean interaction that's comfortable or non-confrontational. A safe communication environment means that everybody understands that frank and challenging communication is actually encouraged. Each person in the culture also understands that this type of communication is always going to be delivered with positive intent. This type of culture promotes a level of direct communication that borders on discomfort for average and lower performing cultures. When you have this level of directness and frankness and clarity, it can be pretty uncomfortable for cultures that have cracks in them or have fissures that need to be repaired. This requires a commitment to communicating in a way that's direct, but it still has to be respectful. Elite performers always err on the side of too much communication rather than too little. This is something I can't overemphasize. Some of the best performing organizations that I've ever focused on working with, they over communicate. They share everything. They make sure 3 times that everybody understands what's going, because when you break out of the huddle, if you're going to run the play, if there was any question, you're not going to be as efficient running the play as if you completely understood it. So this process is a significant driver in the communication delivery for them. And it ensures that everybody feels like the communication is equitable, it's prompt, and it's fluent. There's really low tolerance for frivolous communication, and the content's expected to be relevant, complete, and transparent at all times. They place great emphasis on timely answers and prompt feedback. Each team member defaults to giving each other the benefit of the doubt until there's a significant reason to do otherwise. Similar to the concept with trust, right? If you have a communications environment where everybody's delivering the information, people and they're delivering in the form that's expected, it removes that doubt, and it makes people comfortable that the reason they're getting this information is for the good of the organization. So team members do seek solutions during conflict rather than or debate, rather than just seeking victory. I see a lot of this where you set in a team meeting and there's one or two people that are competing for their idea to win, no matter whether it's the best idea or not, right? They're in there competing for victory rather than trying to promote consensus. It creates opportunities for people to speak openly and challenge each other, and that culture always allows for constructive feedback that can be delivered. It can be delivered with passion and precision and emotion, but it's always transparent as to what the motive is. Another unique characteristic of these cultures is their recognition that listening is just as essential as speaking, and nonverbal communication speaks as loudly as verbal communication in these organizations. So why would we want to do this? Well, by eliminating hidden agendas and useless rhetoric, these organizations spend much more of their time addressing more productive topics, such as exploring risk-taking as a performance driver and tackling barriers to execution. So relentless risk assessment is entirely different in a profound way. The relentless risk assessment component is so crucial because it's a multiplier rather than an additive like the first three components. So over the years, I believe most of us have become far too risk adverse to ever reach our full potential. As a society, I think we've become a group of risk avoiders rather than risk mitigators. So let's take something as simple as riding a bike when we were kids. Now, I'm old enough that that's the kind of bike you got when you were a kid. And when I was a kid, they gave you a bike like that, and they told you to stay outside and not come back until dark. And then to show you that they cared, as you rode away, they just say something, mushy like, "Be careful, don't crack your melon," and they expect to see you by 10 o'clock at night. Nowadays, we wouldn't dream of sending our kids out without a helmet, knee pads, probably a mask. Hell, we'd probably bubble wrap them if we thought we could get away with it. And our childhood experiences influence the way we deal with risk as adults. So for self-preservation, all of us have this innate, built-in natural reaction that kicks in whenever we perceive risk in our environment. Almost all of us are familiar with the fight or flight response. It's our natural reaction when something happens that's perceived as an imminent threat to our well-being. But there's a third response, and you'll know of it, but you might not be as familiar with it. And that's, in addition to fight or flight, there's a freeze response. This response adds a crucial dimension as to how we're likely to respond when a situation confronts us that overwhelms our ability to cope. This is the condition that leaves us paralyzed to move forward, probably out of fear. I know you know this feeling. It's the one that when things become so overwhelming that your brain just sort of shuts down, when you can't think logically and you can't stop the little voices in your head telling you everything's going to go wrong. But in every situation, we have a choice. We can either stay in the fray and fight through the issues, or we can turn and walk away. For most of us, walking away isn't a viable choice. Even if we decide to fight our way forward, though, it's often our pace that creates the biggest obstacle. So inside, we might think the best way to minimize risk is to just do the safe thing. Take tiny little steps, especially in the corporate arena. You think to yourself, if I don't question too much, if I don't imagine too boldly, focus too intently, or affiliate too broadly, how much risk could there be in that? I'll just be really careful, do my job, keep my head down, and minimize all the risks. And maybe that'll be enough to keep me safe from all the change and turmoil that's always going on around me. Unfortunately, as most of us have already witnessed firsthand, that's not how it actually works. The real risk in that equation is the freeze part. In an attempt to protect ourselves in that harsh and chaotic corporate environment, we wake up one day only to realize that we're frozen in place and unable to execute our strategy. There's a tremendous amount of risk in being too risk adverse. So this happens to individuals, it happens to teams, and leaders aren't immune to it either. So don't let your tendency to freeze in place stand in the way of building an elite performance culture. So when you combine the deep understanding of what's driving your people with extraordinary trust environment and the high quality communications that we've talked about, you've got a strong engine to move your elite performance forward. At that point, the organization's relationship with risk becomes the deciding factor in whether or not the culture can use that engine efficiently. Cultures that avoid risk entirely can't avail themselves of reasonable opportunities, and they'll routinely miss out on productive engagements. On the other hand, cultures that ignore risk and engage in high risk, low return opportunities are just relentlessly, needlessly wasting their resources and damaging their reputations in the process potentially. Elite performers embrace risk, mitigate risk, and use their ability to do so as a competitive advantage in their marketplace. If you're focused on building an elite performance culture, you've got to formally evaluate your risk assessment process. You got to define it. You got to figure out how to measure it. You have to analyze its current effect on your productivity, and then commit yourself to making relentless risk assessment part of your performance culture. So the fifth element is impeccable execution. And impeccable execution allows the organization to bring this performance engine to bear in the marketplace and to implement and execute its corporate competitive strategy at will, really. They use their mastery of the four previous elite performance elements to project power and influence into their marketplace. So the elite performance culture's strength allows them to shift the structural makeup of the environment that they work in to disadvantage all other competitors. Now, these cultures are fair and ethical, but they use their ability to impeccably execute to always put the odds of success in their favor. They demand that their ability to execute be impeccable, but here's a key point. They understand that it's not always going to be flawless. Elite performance cultures recognize that they can excel by focusing on execution, but they also accept that they can't eliminate all the barriers to execution. The most developed of these cultures really seldom look at anything as a true barrier to execution. They view them as obstacles that have to be appropriately navigated rather than insurmountable barriers. They focus on identifying and overcoming barriers in four major categories: people barriers, vision barriers, leadership barriers, and resource barriers. Now, they plan and train on how to go around these obstacles, to go over these obstacles, even through these obstacles, but they never really view them as a real barrier that impedes their forward momentum. So to make impeccable execution into a core competency and create an environment where execution flourishes, these organizations focus their efforts on execution with laser accuracy. They know that goal setting in an elite performance culture always has to have execution in mind, and that the organization's not afraid to go after big, bold goals. But they also recognize bandwidth constraints, and they prioritize their efforts so they engage only in the most meaningful opportunities. Measurement and tracking are considered essential best practices, and an attitude that suggests that if you can't measure it and you can't track it, it's not real, is ever present in these organizations, especially in the special operations community. Elite performance cultures challenge the status quo with operational tempos that are challenging, but they keep them achievable. Doesn't do you any good if you march off at light speed and leave half your troops on the side of the road. So holding every member of the culture to a high standard of execution means that the potential of each elite performance element is both realized and maximized. So you might be saying to yourself now, hey, I want these things, but how am I going to work on these? How do we work on this? So we covered a lot of ground in this last 40 minutes or so. We defined why an elite performance culture is desirable. We identified what type of environments are most conducive to producing these remarkable cultures. And then we detailed exactly what elements make this extraordinary productivity possible. So hopefully, you're wondering all along the way, how can I tap into this? How can I use these insights and characteristics to take my practice to the top? So let's talk about that specifically for just a few minutes. First, as I said in the very beginning, none of this happens without commitment. By this point, it should be pretty apparent that although it's desirable and doable, it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without proactively pursuing it. That's where the commitment comes in. Just as anything else that you've ever done in your career that's been successful, it requires a certain level of change and sacrifice if you really want to reap the full rewards. And because it's not easy, you have to have a high level of commitment to keep you from backsliding and defaulting into the old habits of the old culture. Next, you need to see yourself with greater clarity and carefully examine your primary motivations and what drivers are influencing you on a day-to-day basis. A formal elite performance development program can help that happen over several months, but it doesn't happen in just a few hours. There's no way that I can distill this into a few magic bullet points and it will change your perspective and your performance culture in this 1 hour time frame. But right here today, I feel like I can give you one clear action step for each element to think over, which will bring you a small component of each of the 5 elements into a much clearer perspective for you when you go back to your office this afternoon. So extraordinary motivational insights. There are 6 key motivators that influence every individual's actions. The way we think about knowledge, resource utilization, the impact of your surroundings, our perspective about the sources of power and where power comes from, how we can interact with others, and the system we choose to live by are motivators that determine all of our outcomes. And as I said before, there are sophisticated tools that I can help you with that give you an incredible amount of clarity into who you are and why you are what you are. I can provide you with access to them, but you should recognize that the more deeply you understand these 6 motivators and how they're influencing you, the greater your opportunity to achieve elite performance will be. I believe in the power of these motivators so profoundly that I can tell you that just thinking about them and being introspective about how these 6 things might matter to you and might be influencing you will immediately start to improve your day-to-day productivity. I've seen it time and time again. Extraordinary trust. It's one of the most essential characteristics of a culture, and in many ways, it's one of the most challenging areas to make immediate gains. It's so difficult because it embodies that constant challenge of turning aspirations into actions. And here I would suggest that you immediately focus on the concept that trust is not earned, it's granted. It may be uncomfortable at first, but over time, you could sort of modify your thinking about this concept to default to always granting trust until there's a reason not to, and it will improve your productivity. We'll need to work further on trust best practices and strengthening that environment over time, but it's so well worth the effort to get started on it today. Exceptional communication. I've researched and documented the exceptional communication characteristics of the elite military units that I was part of, as well as the successful business units I had the pleasure of leading. And I've always been most impressed that the best practices in play there are already aligned with the best academic theory about communication. And I'm not huge on academic theory, but I will tell you that in the area of communication, there's so much information available to you and so much good best practices that come from academia that you could really benefit from it. The one takeaway that stands out above all others in this hyper-productive communication environment, though, is that members don't engage with each other for rhetorical victory. They engage vigorously. They don't, but instead of seeking victory, they're looking for ways to challenge each other in a way that promotes what I would call vetted consensus. And that's what you're really striving for, is vetted consensus. A focus on my best practice in this area can give you several tools and techniques to utilize. And over time, I think you can be amazed at the results that you'll get out of the exceptional communication capabilities. Relentless risk assessment. There's a few questions to ask yourself here. Just ask yourself, are you frozen in place? Are you a risk mitigator or a risk avoider? Are you missing valuable opportunities or engaging in unwise risk return scenarios? This is pretty straightforward, and it's really, really missing in almost all of the performance cultures that I start working with. And then lastly, when it comes to execution, I think it's absolutely imperative that you recognize that there's no such thing as flawless execution, only impeccable execution. Impeccable execution is a very, very high standard to aspire to, and I see a lot of organizations that cause themselves a lot of strife because they're pursuing flawless execution. My observation and experience suggests that the quickest way to impeccable execution is to make the immediate mental switch from thinking about barriers to thinking about obstacles and how you navigate around them. There are no barriers, there's only obstacles. So there are 5 things that you can do right now to help put yourself squarely on the path to elite performance. Building an elite performance culture, it's right here for all of us to accomplish. It's just up to us to do the hard work and make what's needed a reality. So once again, what you really have to do is you just have to buckle up that chin strap and then go out and make it happen. Go get it. So I'll leave you with that, and I'll be happy to answer, do a little Q&A here, answer some questions. I'm sure that at this point there are some questions with a group this large.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. There are a few questions. When you said vetted consensus, that reminds me of a Bezos quote about disagree and commit. So
Okay.
One of the questions is, in the beginning, you mentioned 4 drivers that may be compelling individuals, and later you mentioned 6 other drivers. Can you draw a distinction between those, and are they the same?
First, very astute that someone's paying attention and noticed that. So the five major drivers, those categories, the desire to compete, the desire to bond, the desire for power, and the desire for knowledge. Those are just major categories that I could sit down with somebody and in a conversation we could talk about how they're compelling people. The 6 drivers that I mentioned later are definable and measurable and have been vetted and verified over the course of time. And I've got an assessment tool that can help you identify those. And really, there's subcategories of those 4 major drivers. But what the analysis does is as I said earlier, there's no one thing. I mean, there's probably somebody, the exception to the rule, that one thing's driving them every day and all that they do. But in general, we're complex people, and there are different motivations, combination of motivations that are driving us and compelling us. And the more we understand that about ourselves, and the more our leaders understand how to tailor opportunities to appeal to what's naturally driving us, the more likely that we're going to have high output and achieve an elite performance culture.
Yeah, thank you. In your experience, why are some organizations so much more risk averse than others?
Well, I think we have created an environment. I'm a student of military history, and if you go back to World War II, for example, some of the most famous generals that even people that don't study history would know, the MacArthurs of the world and the Halsey, the famous naval admiral. Early in their careers, they had some horrendous mistakes that would be one and done today in our current environment, the way we work. We don't forgive any failure, and it's holding ourselves to a high standard, and I appreciate that. But experiences teach people what the outcomes may be in the future. And we live in an environment where you make a serious corporate mistake, you may lose your job. And we as organizations, when we look at risk assessment, we have to take risk more holistically, and we have to look at what is the risk to the business model? If this minor thing happened that meant we didn't get this account or we didn't get the outcome that we looked, is that going to help us be better at what we do in the future? Is that going to teach this person? So to answer your question, I think people are very risk adverse because we live in a society that says we're not very tolerant of making mistakes and we don't learn from the things that we do wrong.
Yeah. Okay, last question. If we want to engage in developing a more productive performance culture within our own team, how do we decide where to start?
So I would say if somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, look, I want to work with you," and I work with two-person teams, and I work with Fortune 100, I mean, I could say this, I work with Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, and do regional stuff for them. Um, and they're vastly different engagements. But we always start at the same place. That's the reason I mentioned this, and that is we do a very simple assessment. It's not very expensive to do either, and it's a good place to start to get to know each other. We look at what's motivating the people that we're talking to, and how those motivations overlap and interact, and then we basically do an assessment at that point of the four other areas, all five areas, and determine where are we going to make the biggest impact on the culture and the productivity by starting wherever. And usually, not always, but usually that starts with motivational insights, an analysis of that, or a focus on trust. One of those two places. Seldom, I get most people, I get lots of CEOs and that said, I want my organization to be better executors. I want to start with execution. And I sat down and spent some time with that equation, that the profound motivational insights plus trust plus communication, you're back to your old math days, parenthetically add together, and then relentless risk assessment is a factor. It's a multiplier, right? Then you get to execution. And so to answer your question, maybe it's too late for a short answer, but we'd start on motivational insights or trust and do some assessment about how that's working currently in the organization.
Okay. Yeah, and what I think another thing I hear you saying is that, like most things worthwhile, you can't skip steps.
True, true. Although I have, I've been on both sides of this equation. I mean, I've been in situations where I've struggled with the team that I had, trying to figure out how do we maximize this most. And I've tried very hard in proven paradigm consulting in my practice to find ways that I can engage at every level, that I can help somebody at the most basic level or a long-term engagement. And frankly, I get people that fear, oh yeah, I mean, if we're going to change this, it's a 3-year engagement and I can't really make that commitment. It doesn't have to be that way. I mean, I do one-on-one executive consulting, and when I do coaching, when I do that, we're always talking about one individual situation. How are we going to solve that and then move to the next?
Yeah, that's great to know. And I think that's very helpful for the audience too, because we have such a wide span of people in different positions on this call right now listening.
I feel good always about 30% of my business is with the financial industry. I mean, that's where I spent my entire career after I got out of the military. I came from the military, Ranger and Pathfinder sort of operations, and then got by happenstance into the financial industry. And I can relate. I mean, I've been a broker, a branch manager, a complex director. Then I went on the distribution side and did it for many years. At PIMCO and Pioneer and Equinox. It's one of the toughest jobs that there are. Simply, I mean, I work with all sorts of people. I know that it's tough to do and be good at because we're asked to do so many different things. I feel good about my experience in that I can relate to that and work with people and help them.
Yeah. Well, look, Eric, thank you so much for being here, for taking this time. I found this incredibly insightful. I can't imagine that anybody that heard this didn't feel the same. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody for taking the time to join. I really appreciate it.
100%. Yes. And for the audience, just be on the lookout for the replay of this next week. We will follow up with that and some additional follow-ups. And thank you for taking time and taking part of your afternoon to enjoy this and invest in enhancing your culture and the steps that you can take along the way. So thank you.